First year I did it here, it was during the air show was starting, and our Star Spangled Banner comes on. I'm like, our national anthem.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight live in person.
All right.
Hey.
How cool is that? I have never done a show like that. Obviously, we've approached 200 shows now.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
That's 200 hours I'll never get back. It's been fun.
Considering the number of times you've been on a show, I think that's actually true.
Right.
It's interesting story, just really briefly before we get started. We launched SocialFlight in itself to promote general aviation, to give everyone missions, reasons to fly, do everything that we could to kind of support general aviation. And then when the pandemic hit and everyone got locked down, that's when it became, well, what do we do next? All the live in-person events went away. We first started putting together all of the webinars that people were doing, anything that we could do to engage people. And then that led to, well, let's have a show.
And how many people started watching more webinars during the pandemic, right? I mean, it gave us something to do.
Absolutely. Awesome. And so it has turned into this wonderful thing, and I consider it a blessing. The thing that puts the biggest smile on my face is every week I get to meet a new amazing person in general aviation, and in most cases, in every case, to be honest with you, they become lifelong friends, and that includes my friend Brian Schiff over here, proficient pilot. A round of applause, please.
Thank you.
And Jason Miller of the Finer Points, another amazing person as far as learning. Thank you guys so much, and thanks to everyone who's come out here and all of you. And if you are a SocialFlight user, if you've got it on your phone, if you've done it, if you use us and get our email, we've got some swag for you. And if we run out, then I will find some more and we'll get it out to you. And we have a cart that's going around. So catch up after we're done and we'll get started with that. And so, let's get on to the show. So I wanted to start by asking both of you guys, and Jason, I'm going to start with you. Both of you are renowned aviation educators, and I wanted to know, of the last recent time, 12 months ago, maybe going back a year or two, or even since the pandemic, what's something that you have seen in education, in aviation education, that you really like, you think is going in the right direction? And then maybe we'll talk the other direction later.
Oh, wow. Well, I think it's going in the right direction. Well, I think that people have access. This is good and bad, by the way. What I'm about to say, we could easily make this argument as things that are going wrong. But I think in today's world, people have access to great information if they want it. They can go to YouTube, they can go to Brian's webinars on Monday night, they can watch my channel. There's all sorts of ways for people to tune into good information. And a lot of the people I'm meeting here at Oshkosh are saying things to me like, really flattering things, but hey, I've been watching your channel for a long time. I really like your stuff because you focus on safety and you focus on raising the bar and you focus on excellence. That kind of stuff is out there and available for people to find before they even get into flight training. And I think that's a great thing. Mm-hmm. I also think, that whole world of YouTube and Instagram is why we're seeing so many pilots come into the industry. I mean, we're really in a flood,
right.
of pilots coming into the industry. And so I think I see it as partially my job to make sure that quality information is a guiding beacon. And in the landscape of finding all sorts of garbage information that you can, that we should sort of shine through. I think that's going on.
So one of the challenges with that I think we've all seen, but it's hard to sometimes discern the difference of, or the impact of, is how do you know what good information is? Brian, can you comment on, both of you guys have extremely good reputations. I trust everything that I get from you, even if you don't think I should.
I took advantage of that.
But realistically, when anyone can have a camera.
So I think that's what, if you're going to ask me what I've seen that has been good in the last 12 months is the talent, the ease of which talent can enter our industry and have a wonderful influence. Call them influencers, call them YouTubers, whatever. Like Jason said, we have to be careful. What I really like is the fact that there are people very skilled out there at making graphics, and they might make a really neat graphic that helps many people who can't understand an explanation of a topic, but they can see it in this graphic that somebody made. So the talent that's entering our industry, because it's easy to enter the industry that way. The other thing that I really like the talent entering the industry is that we have record numbers of retired airline people or commercial pilots, charter pilots, whatever. We have record numbers of those people getting back to their roots in general aviation and bringing that experience back to GA. What was your question again about that?
What's going good?
Well, I know I've seen some things
How do you
out there
parse
where
out-
you get people like recording their flights, I think sometimes it crosses the line between someone who is, let's say, a CFI or knows what they're doing, educating, or someone who's just out there being a personality, and you start to see some things that maybe aren't the best habits.
Yeah, so I think the uglier the person is, the more credibility they have. And that bodes well for me. But when you see a very beautiful, voluptuous, blonde, male or female, flying in a bikini, showing you their trip to here, okay, I think we're all human. We understand where the credibility can come or go. Why are we watching this? Is it because of their knowledge or something else? But I also think that you need to be very careful. We get a lot of accident analysis. We like to watch what happened in an accident. We're very curious. We had a couple recently here, and it's very unfortunate. We all want to know right now. We're in an age where information is so readily available, but just use caution for the internet rapid response teams.
Yeah, and I also think another thing we can look to is community. I mean, that's the way things work in the real world. If some guy moves in next to you and you get to know him at your hangar and it's a really nice person, then someone else at the airport says, what do you think of Jeff, the guy that moved in? You say, oh, he's a nice guy, he's solid, he flies smart, whatever. We rely on each other's opinions. And so, that's why I'm always having Brian on my show. I've been on Brian's show. There's creators like Flight Chops, and my company sponsors Juan Brown, because I think he does a good job. But I think you can look around and try to find an online community in a similar way that you do in your local community, and it can be some amount of credibility. Like if Brian tells me someone's great and puts him on his show, that means a lot to me. I respect Brian. That means a lot.
I think another very solid piece of useful advice to answer your question is if somebody gives you sources, if they're telling you something, trying to teach you something online, if they offer their resources and they're good, credible resources where they're getting it. So here's what the information is. A good instructor will give you why that is. If they don't give you a why, they're not teaching, they're just telling. And then lastly, they got to give you a reference, some kind of official source of reference. Not Joey's How to Fly by Night book says that this is blah, 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 but it's something credible. So look for credible resources.
I like that. I like that one a lot. I mean, coming from the maintenance world where I am predominantly, as an AP and an IA, I say that's a huge problem. I mean, because you see things out there, and I certainly do, having to do with ways that people maintain their aircraft, decisions that they make associated with that, even that shops have done, that when you talk to manufacturers, when you really understand the details of how something should be done, are just wrong.
Yeah, just because it's an official shop doesn't mean they do it right. I remember with my airplane talking to Jeff about something that was atrociously accomplished. And I didn't know, as an aircraft, just a pilot, not a mechanic. So you got to look for resources.
Are there some things having to do with flying that are corollaries that come to mind with that? I mean, I can, of course, like I said, on the maintenance side, I can think of things where people are just doing it wrong because they were taught wrong, and over and over and over, even though they're teaching other people.
Like that in flying?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Can you give me an example of something that you think is really was corrected out there a little more?
I can give you one right away. This is a minor thing, maybe.
Yeah.
But level off procedures. Pitch, power. What do they say? Pitch, power, trim. That's the way they want you to do it in the book. Everyone says pitch over the aircraft, adjust your power, then set your trim, and that's just wrong. So what'll happen if you do it that way is you end up 200 or 300 feet above your altitude because you have to wait until the aircraft accelerates to cruise speed before you adjust the power. It's just a minor thing, but the whole world started teaching it wrong. And every time instrument students come to me, they end up 300 feet high, so we have to go back and fix their level off procedure and then move forward. But there are countless examples of that kind of thing.
So you're telling me that as an instrument pilot, what I was taught to bust your altitude by 300 feet, go down so that you can accelerate as quickly as possible to the airspeed that you want to do to get there.
Is your transponder on or off in that circumstance?
It's ADS-B. Everyone's watching everything we're doing all the time.
The step is not a thing.
Yeah,
The step is not a thing.
There
Yeah,
you go.
I think one of the things that totally lost it.
The step, come on.
No, it wasn't that.
I know it works. No? The step's not a thing?
No, it's
I
not
can't
a
get
thing.
on step like a seaplane or a boat?
You can't create energy. No, it cannot be created or destroyed.
But to Brian's point, there are some other YouTube creators. Like there's one I was thinking of. I'll just say because I like him a lot. Trent Palmer. I don't know if you guys have watched Trent's videos. But there are times where Trent comes close to teaching, and instead of actually teaching, he will literally say in the video, "I'm not a teacher. I'm not an expert here." And then he'll say, "If you want the teacher and you want the expert, go to this URL, backcountryaviation.com or whatever it is. He's the real teacher. But anyway, I'm going to show you what I know." So
Yeah.
he really qualifies it in the video as "I'm not the expert," and then points you to the expert. So that's respectable. If people are doing it that way, that's nice to see.
And I got one more for you. It's becoming a thing, and it really needs to stop. Has anybody flown into a non-towered airport? Okay. Straight ins at non-towered airports. Discussed. No, not that. What I'm getting at is, have you heard on the radio somebody say, "I'm on a right teardrop for left traffic for runway whatever"? Has anybody heard that or been saying it? If you're saying it, stop.
Yeah.
It's not in the aim. It's not there. You're going to go away from the airport and you're going to enter on a 45. You're not doing a teardrop to enter the pattern. But what we have a little problem with is, unfortunately, Flight paints a teardrop entry into the pattern. It doesn't take you quite far enough away. If you look at the airplane flying handbook, you need to go get away from the airport on the pattern side to come back in on a 45 and announce you that you're coming in and entering the pattern on a 45. But I'm hearing more and more left teardrop, right teardrop for left traffic, and those of us with this color hair don't understand what that means because it's not published anywhere.
It's not a thing. Yeah, it's a Flight thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
And
right.
then I have a buddy that calls that tribal knowledge. Like
Yeah.
when there's just so many of us doing something, like so many of us use Flight that if they start calling it a teardrop, we all start calling it a teardrop. We don't really know why.
Yeah.
It's just what we start doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of those.
Yeah, and there's a lecture I do, I think I mentioned on the call, but it's called Lessons from the Titanic, where I literally, no, for real though, if you just make an analogy to the Titanic, you have this new technology that everyone's super confident in. They think it's unbeatable. They think it means that they can just drink tea on the bridge while they steam to New York, but they end up hitting an iceberg. So I joke with my students that we're looking for the proverbial icebergs, right? We're looking for what technology are we overconfident in, or what technology is wagging the dog, like Brian just said. It's important to, for CFIs, I think that's our primary job in today's world. Figure out where the icebergs are and how to hold true to what we've learned over the last 120 years.
I love that analogy. I mean, that's really good. And I will say the tower doesn't necessarily solve anything because we visited Griffiths, Rome, New York on the way there, and I swear on the radio, someone was trying to tell the tower that they were 5 miles to the left of the airport. I'm not making that up.
That's ridiculous.
That was a real thing. And that conversation went on for a long time because the tower kept asking them to clarify, and the person could not understand why they didn't understand what their left hand was.
Is that your left or my left?
Exactly.
That's terrifying. That story's terrifying.
That's
Wow.
real. That's a
someone
real
looking
thing.
at a GPS box. Right?
I wanna
They're
talk-
looking at a Garmin 530 saying they're left of the
I'm not making that up.
I want to talk to the instructor in that case. I really do.
I think that was the
Yeah, it
instructor,
was.
but yeah.
Exactly.
I want to ask you about something else, and that is stick and rudder flying. It seems to me like with how pressured the system is, how many people coming into general aviation, there's almost, maybe I'm wrong, but you guys would know the truth. It seems to me that back, maybe I was lucky, when I learned, people would teach me these things about like how to aggressively slip in if you're too high, how to know what was going on, not to be uncontrolled in any way, but to really understand how your aircraft flies outside of staying in the dead center of doing everything perfect. How to fly the plane. What are your thoughts on that?
Get training from somebody who is comfortable on the edge of the envelope a little bit. And so come fly with me in my Citabria. When we do that, it's going to be, you're going to do your tail wheel check out with me,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah. Come do that. You wake your feet up and learn what the rudder's for. and you learn what slips are all about because there's no flaps. But you need to go up with someone experienced and have them show it to you, and you will have an aha moment. Has anybody been over to the PPC to take any of the lessons that they're doing over there? Yeah, they're doing some great things with learn to turn. Turning is something that it seems a lot of accidents come out of a turn. And unfortunately, we need to really learn to turn. And I, at about, 20,000 hours into my flying, was flying with my good friend, Mark King, who's a master instructor for aerobatics. And we're flying along, and we're slipping down to get down to pattern altitude, and I'm trying to do a slipping turn, and I'm just like, it's too wide, and we're in a valley, and there's a mountain right in front of me, and he's like, I'm like, this, I just can't get it. If I stay in the slip, I can't turn it very steep. And he goes, pull. While we're in the slip, I pulled, and this thing just changed about 90 degrees of heading instantly. And I'd never seen that. It was a really aha moment for me, because I was always afraid to do any pulling while I'm slipping. But go up with somebody, even I, as an experienced pilot, I'm learning more. The more people I fly with their specialty, there are specialists out there, and go fly with them.
Okay, so that really is interesting to me. Let me also clarify where I'm coming from. You mentioned kind of the edge of the envelope, and we're not talking about being outside in any way. We're not talking about being in a danger zone in any way. But let me see a show of hands with folks that are here, since we're live. This is this great opportunity. How many people have, when they're flown an aircraft, felt what it's like, actually loaded the plane so that you are inside the envelope, safely inside the envelope, but aft CG, so you can see the aft, what it feels like to fly your plane towards the aft end of your envelope. Just a few. That's a perfect example, depending on what kind of aircraft you fly. That's what I'm talking about, is like CG, heavy loading. One last question for all you guys. How about like loaded close to your max useful load? Okay, a little more, that's good, because we all fly airplanes that probably don't have a lot of useful load.
But never over the max useful load, right?
Unless you're in Alaska. So you get 10%.
Unless you're in
Is that the way it
Alaska.
works? Yeah, automatically you go across the line, they give you 10% more. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts about exploring it, because that's a pet peeve of mine. I feel like everyone should know what that's like.
Well, I think it's important to notice it's kind of, in my mind, a three-prong attack, honestly. Like, so you have the ACS changed from the PTS to the ACS, and when it did that in certification, certain edge of the envelope maneuvers, such as the short field landing, were nerfed a little. They were nerfed.
MCA.
Right? You no longer needed to do a steep approach, on the low edge of the envelope. Now you just need to land at a slow speed. MCA is another one that was taken out. So one bit of the problem is the evolution of the FAA training standards. But another problem is the fact that CFIs are moving so fast through the system in the last 10 years, or let's say 7 to 10 years, that folks like Brian are rare. Like, to find a guy that's gonna go take you up in his Citabria and learn all this stuff. And I think the third prong of the attack is, I don't want to blame glass panels, because I have nothing against glass panels, but every glass panel airplane has a sophisticated 3-axis autopilot. So, like, this is more for instrument pilots, but I think most instrument pilots aren't flying, they're not flying the plane, they're just flying on these fancy
Very true.
autopilots, which is fine. But for all these reasons, we're seeing a degradation in stick and rudder skills, and so it's hard. How do you blame a young CFI who doesn't have a ton of experience and is working off a new ACS, which is pretty nerfed?
Yeah.
And I think what we have to do as pilots, and what I do for my students.
Whoop!
Oh,
Look,
no.
that's okay. Look, burn.
It's all right.
Look, part of
Is just seek out people like Brian, because they'll spill coffee on you. No, I'm kidding. Seek out people like Brian who have a Citabria. All of my students, of course, are learning everything I can teach them. But in addition to that, I send most of them for an aerobatic lesson or something.
Ooh, I like that.
With a student out in a Citabria, so they can figure out what spins really feel like. In my younger years, I used to do it, but these days, I'll just send them to somebody who has a Citabria and a parachute and say, go feel all this stuff.
Spin's a normal descent. By the way, it's not in the mess up, it's in the recovery. That's how we judge. That's how we judge.
I think about it also in terms of all the people here who maybe own an aircraft, and the idea that I hate the idea that the time would come to fly to AirVenture, to take another person because someone's visiting you, to go to the airport for a flight you were going to do, and it's a really hot day or it's really humid, which I discovered.
You're heavy, slow to 90 knots, do
You're
S-turns.
a test pilot all of a sudden.
Yeah. The
About
first time
can I
you
get out of my runway, or what's it going to feel like to rotate just because your calculations were right.
Yeah, the first time you get near the edge shouldn't be when under a real life situation. You need to do it under a controlled practice situation that you know what it feels like to get near the edge. That's why when I do my turn back talks, the possible turn or the impossible turn, it is impossible if you have not practiced it, because there are forces involved that you're not used to. It's surprising. You've got to go practice these things before you're asked to do it in real life. And so to see what a spin is like in real life, it's a normal descent for me.
Yep.
I mean, it's letting it down. But to not ever see what these extreme maneuvers are like and always live in the center, that's when it's going to bite you, when you have to get a little bit toward the edge.
That makes sense. And the other thing I just want to add is it's not always about the edge. It's about understanding what you can do with your plane, because you can do more than you think in many cases. Once someone teaches you how to, you can actually figure out, like, hey, I didn't realize I can actually take that.
So before the day of the stabilized approach, when I was flying the Boeing 727 as a co-pilot, I had a captain show me that you can actually stay 250 knots all the way to the marker and then start dropping gears, spoilers, flaps, everything on schedule. In 500 feet, you're spinning up the throttles. And I know they're not called throttles in the jet. But anyway, you spin up the power, and right there, you're stabilized. I didn't know you could do it all from that point on, but I saw a guy do it. I saw how it could be done, and I witnessed, okay, I didn't know this airplane could do that, to your example.
I like that.
Yeah, and it's, training's always been hard. You don't want to push the line so far that it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've met folks, there was one guy I can think of who would land off airport with everybody in his Citabria. He would land actually in a field. And when you first hear that, you think that's probably amazing training. And it probably was, like right up till the day he hit that power line, and he's not with us anymore. You know what I mean? So you have to draw the line somewhere.
Right.
But we're not anywhere near close enough to it.
I think that's the problem, right?
And then for CFIs out there, here's just one tip regarding like max gross weight. Do back seating. If you're a CFI, have your first student stay longer, just on 1 or 2 days, so that student can ride in the back seat. They'll learn a ton from the student they're watching, and the student they're watching gets to experience max gross weight.
Ooh, I like that. That's a really good idea. You
Yeah,
brought
that's good
up,
advice.
you touched on the subject of accidents. It's anecdotal, I guess, in my head, because the stats come out and say that we're doing better in so many ways. And yet I think the three of us have all lost people close to us probably in the last year. And there've been some recent ones even here. What's happening?
Can I do an
you
informal
think
poll?
that's real?
Informal poll, since we're live. How many of you know someone who was killed in an airplane accident? How many of you know someone who was killed in an automobile accident? It's a little bit less, it looks like to me, but you know a lot more people who drive cars, yet less of you know someone who was killed in an automobile accident than in an airplane accident. It is, and because we're having a recent rash of accidents, I think, and I want to get up on a soapbox and be angry, and I want to yell a cuss word, and I want to say, take this stuff seriously. Pilots are, so if you say what are the bad things we're seeing recently, I think it's complacency and apathy, and I think the glass cockpit, the automation, and the high rotation rate through the glass doors of flight instructors is not getting the compound solid training out there. With that, I think we get pilots who get into the airplane like you guys and us get into a car. They get in and drive, figuring everything's just going to work. And lo and behold, something goes wrong, but they hadn't been thinking, what am I going to do if my engine quits right now? Because they just get in, turn the key, drive, put on their MP3, watch the glass in front of them. Maybe there's a movie on another piece of glass. But I just don't think it's being taken seriously enough. And I think those of you in here are the choir, and I'm preaching to the choir, because you're here, you're concerned about safety, you're attending seminars, webinars, and you're learning more, and you're concerned for safety. And so I've been getting in this recent rash of accidents and calls from the media. Is aviation becoming dangerous? Is aviation dangerous? Well, I put a new quote on my website because I had to think carefully about this, how I answer that question. Is aviation dangerous? My answer is aviation is full of hazards. There are many hazards. And how a pilot deals with those hazards will determine whether it's safe or dangerous. It's up to the pilot. Some pilots, very safe. Some pilots, very dangerous.
I love that.
Yeah, and I think we have a lot of work to do here. A lot of the work that I've done and Brian and I have done together on my channel is about adopting professional procedures. It's my honest, heartfelt belief that professional procedures guard us more than anything else because the company that invented the procedures lived through the crash. If you can just follow that simple logic. The company lived through the crash and survived to make modifications in the procedures that would prevent the crash from happening a second time. So all we need to do is find some good single pilot operator out there with solid standard operating procedures and adopt them as though we're getting hired by that company. You don't even have to understand why you're doing them. I promise baked into the procedure itself is everything you need to know, because the company didn't want to lose another airplane. They didn't want anyone else to crash. And if I could do a small bit of egregious self-promotion.
Oh, please do.
I'm going to leave some cards up here on the stage. In our app, we teach a full set of standard operating procedures for single pilot operators. It's in our private pilot course on the flight side. And the show special this week is a 2-week free trial. So you guys can get the free trial, learn the SOPs, and cancel, and it won't cost you a penny. But you'll learn those procedures that we borrowed from the professional operators.
And it's those SOPs that Jason teaches in his program that actually keep airlines safer than general aviation. Do it the same way every time. We know what we're going to do. When you do a mag check, I always go 2 clicks over, 2 clicks back, 1 click over, 1 click back. I never start with the left mag or the 1 click, because it sets up a propensity to go 2 clicks over, then 1 click back. So I always start with 2 over, 2 back. Do you do that?
This kind of like micro precision is what concerns me about today's aviation. So I'll just give you one example. Like the kind of skills that Brian's talking about are probably innumerable. Like you could follow Brian through a flight, and there are probably dozens and dozens and dozens of little micro moments like that.
He spills his coffee.
With the old primer, I have one where I always turn it 180 degrees with my thumb on it. Right? There's all these little tiny procedures. One of those procedures in my world is never put your head down 90 degrees, right? You never do that in an airplane. You always pick things up into your field of vision, right? Now that we all have iPads strapped to our legs, there's a big giant iceberg in front of us, and it looks like this. Okay?
Yeah.
That's the iceberg right there. Like, get that iPad up. So learning how to integrate all those mini micro skills that make Brian an excellent aviator, learning how to build that into today's environment for everybody is critical to our safety.
I love that.
That's true. Speaking of the primer, does anybody push it in and turn it and not pull on it afterwards?
No.
Always pull on it. That way you know that little pin is behind the key. And that's one of the other little micro habit that I think I've developed like over the years by flying with various people. Flying with more pilots, different instructors. Don't always just fly with one, because then you get one way of doing things. The beauty of being an airline pilot too or a professional pilot, you fly with so many different people, you get to see many different techniques. I will get a flight review, even though I don't need to. I like to go up with a different CFI every time. You get much better perspective, a broader view. You take what you like and disregard what you don't.
I love the idea of the procedures, because we've encountered this. My son Jake is there and helping us film there in the background, and we flew out here together. We've done a lot of flying together with everybody, and it's interesting because this is the first time I'm really thinking about it in terms of both single pilot procedures and having a co-pilot, and and the idea of how you do things. Like if you start to feel a concern, in my mind, I'm thinking like, if you start to feel spatial disorientation, there's a procedure that you follow. Like I engage the autopilot, or I do this, or I am just gonna focus on this one thing. And it doesn't matter how many decades I've been flying, I've experienced it and realized that's the procedure. You go straight to this type of thing. And we had something happen mechanically with the plane out here, and what we realized in our after the fact kind of briefing is we should have had a procedure between us to talk about when something happens, and I, as the one that understands the aircraft mechanically the most and wants to solve something, need to have a procedure where I turn the aircraft over to him. I have someone else there, and I know exactly what's happening, and I think that way, instead of thinking in my head, I own this whole thing. I'm going to just start working on this thing. I'm going to start figuring this out. That's an example.
That's a huge thing to have a pre-briefing like that, because how many people have flown into Oshkosh with another pilot in the airplane? Okay, the too many cooks in the kitchen thing plays here. So you need to brief ahead of that. Who's piloting command? What happens if you and I go up in your Bonanza and something happens? We didn't pre-brief what's going to happen.
Yep.
I have a lot more experience, but it's your airplane and you know it a lot better than I do.
Oh yeah, I'm throwing my hands up and jumping in the back.
I'll meet you back there. No, so I will pre-brief that. I will just say, look, this is your airplane and you know it better than I do. If something happens, I'm not going to do anything. You can ask me for help and I will be your help. But your pilot in command, you do it unless you tell me otherwise. I'm not going to do it. So I think that kind of briefing is very important. Who's going to do what if there's more than one pilot in command in the cockpit?
Yeah, that's huge. And another thing I think is great advice in emulating professionals, and I think you said this a moment ago, but the idea that we go back more regularly to our instructors. So now that we're talking about procedures and we understand how important procedures are to our flying, why not continue to emulate what the pros do? And every 6 months, go back to a CFI, ideally the same CFI, so that that CFI can understand the procedures you're trying to learn and trying to adopt and hold you accountable to those things. That's what, I mean, how often do you go back to the airline? Every 6 months?
It's every year now, and we have this iPad training that we do to supplement
So
that.
you're not waiting 2 years before you go back.
Right. No, it's regular training, but we get bulletins, we get iPad training, the home study, and then the simulator every year.
Yeah, and one of the things that's crystallized for me this year is how much pilots are like athletes. And I leverage this analogy a lot. But like if you imagine a great boxer, somebody like Mike Tyson, let's say, my age, older guy. But he knows everything he needs to know about boxing. That doesn't mean he's ready to fight tomorrow. He's got to stay in training. He's got to stay fit. He's got to keep his muscles ready. Pilots are exactly the same. Just because you learned something 4 or 5 years ago doesn't mean you're ready for the fight, which is tomorrow. And the fight is the flight, right? You have to be trained for that flight every time it comes up.
It's a perishable skill.
Yeah, perishable skill.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, absolutely. And I remember, because I came from the avionics world and in developing it, and we did a lot of testing of what would happen, what kind of recurrent training was necessary, literally testing people and seeing what their reaction times were and how they could relearn their avionics. And what we found was that there's some technologies that take you forward, and there's some technologies that, if you're not careful, take you back. And one of the things was that if you go back to the days of the Stone Age, where I and maybe some other people come from, he said, you could get, when you knew how to fly needles and radio navigation, certainly that wasn't as easy and great as all the technology we have now, but you could get in any number of aircraft that had a KX-155 and needles and know how to operate those, know how to fly your procedures. What we found after a lot of the navigators came out is that when we went and tested people, if it had been more than 30 days since you had actually gone and done it, you lost a lot of that knowledge.
Yeah.
You had to get that proficiency back.
Yeah, go practice S-turns across a radial.
Yeah. So yeah, there's some step. I think some things go forward, some things go back. I'd like to talk for a minute about something else that you guys really had me thinking about, which is the idea of decision making you have to make on your own versus having someone to bounce it off of when you have a crew, even pre-flight, even making decisions. Because we all either know people or know of stories where people have made unfortunate decisions, whether it's get-home-itis or something like that. And it would have been different if there was someone to call. How many people here have someone that, if they're thinking about a flight, they're comfortable enough to actually bare their soul and say, I'm thinking I need to come home, it looks okay, what do you think? Really? I think that not many hands went up.
But how many of you
and
would
I'm still
hesitate?
sufficient, because even I don't do it as much as I would think.
Yeah, you should have called me that one time.
Exactly.
So how many of you have that person that you could call, but didn't call them one time intentionally because you knew they would just try to talk you out of what you're about to do?
Really?
Yeah.
I think people don't want to admit to that. I will tell really briefly that story. So we were I flew up to Laconia, New Hampshire, and planning on an overnight, went there for a concert and stuff, and everything looked perfect with the weather planning, and yet it changed. And so on the way back, visibility dropped dramatically in terms of, well, not on the way back, the weather changed when it was time to go back. And watching visibility at night on the weather report go lower and lower and lower. And I'm thinking, I'm IFR, I can make the approach, I can do whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I just kept watching this and started thinking to myself, I'm not sure, and then finally made the decision to stay. And it was a tough decision. It was not as easy as I would like to give myself credit for. It was a tough decision. Finding a place to stay was tough. Everything all of us know about what it takes when you know, pissed off the people with me, everything. And next morning, when we woke up, we found out someone died trying to get into that airport.
Wow.
That night. Literally went into the lake, spatial disorientation, because visibility had gone, not in terms of there were no ceilings, but had gone down to like a mile or something, which it turns out is really low. And that was a wake-up call to me because I didn't talk to anybody.
Yeah. Well, you know, the story that you're describing is the way it goes. And it's the more you fly, after doing this for decades, you start to see that. For example, I could tell you guys probably 24 stories of times I got out of an airplane and said to myself I was too tired to be flying, I probably shouldn't have been flying. But I probably couldn't tell you one story of a flight that I canceled because I was too tired to go. Right? So there's like a disconnect there.
Mm-hmm.
If you read this month's or August AOPA, my dad actually wrote about one such case that I didn't go flying one day. It's a flight that did not occur because I chickened out. Well, he was so proud of me, he wrote about it.
I will say, of all the things I can think back on, the one that taught me the most was not going on that flight. That's what taught me, which was crazy, but that's the one I think about right now. It has changed my flying because I didn't do it and then realized what could have happened.
Right, and so again, back to the professionals, you know, how do the professionals deal with this? It's black and white. I mean, that's it. There are rules, and if you don't follow the rules, you get fired and your kids don't go to college, and that's that. That's enough of a motivator to make sure that pilots don't violate those rules. But we're in the wild here in general aviation. No one's your boss. No one's your chief pilot. You're your own chief pilot, forcing yourself to comply with procedures you invented. So because that's true, unfortunately, it's my belief that it's a matter of pressure. At some point, you would break and fly. But to guard yourself, one last point, to guard yourself on that, what I would recommend is, how many people have personal minimums? Okay, how many of you all have written them down on a piece of paper or a document? Okay, about half of those people. Those of you that have written them down on a piece of paper or a document, email them to the pilot you respect the most. Somebody in your life that you think is an amazing pilot, and say, hey, these are my minimums. And just maybe one day when you're out there with your family in South Dakota at 8 p.m. and you can't get a hold of anybody, in the back of your mind, you're gonna know that if you take off and the weather's beyond your minimums or exceeding your minimums, and something happens, that this pilot is going to know. They're going to know that you violated your minimums. Maybe there's some accountability there, I don't know, but the bottom line is we have to look hard for it because it's not readily available.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That is very, very cool, and I am very hesitant to do that.
So yeah, I'll do a little exercise. A little exercise about personal minimums, because this is the problem we see with people out there in the wild and in the field. Who has a crosswind limit? Personal minimum crosswind limit, okay? Let's say your crosswind limit is 15 knots. 15 knot crosswind component is limit for me. I'm not going. If it's 16 knots, do you fly? Show your hands if you do.
I'll be honest,
Okay,
no one can see. We're not recording the audience.
So what I want you to do is remember this moment. In the tent, in the hangar, you won't lie to yourself. Out at the airplane, you will lie to yourself, because I see people with 15 knot crosswind component limits that say, well, what's 1 knot? 1 knot at the airline world is black and white. It's a no-go. That's it. And we're not happy till you're not happy. So this helps.
But that kind of discipline, 1 knot, is the difference. That's the thing we have to promise ourselves. I mean, how many people used to smoke cigarettes? Anybody? Okay, you guys know who used to smoke cigarettes. You have to make a promise to yourself. You're never ever touching it again ever, right? And that's the only thing you have to remember. You just never do it again and you'll never be back on it. All we have to remember as pilots is we never violate our personal minimums on the day we fly. Okay? You can change your minimums. You can decide that 15 knots is a BS crosswind limit and you can probably do it in 20, but you can't decide that on the day you're landing. Okay? You can only land in 15 and then make that increase.
I like that also. You know, one of the things that we've been talking about as a group here of folks offline that I wanted to share with you and see, just get some feedback. There's a lot of helplines out there, right? For all people with issues and concerns, that we try to save people through helplines, and there are people who volunteer to do that. Do you think if it was completely anonymous, absolutely, and you know that you might call and get some guidance from someone, bounce off something to another experienced pilot, just to talk, and you didn't have to have any repercussions? You can show of hands of how many people might consider using a number like that if they went and we're going to fly.
I like that.
No. How many people would be interested in being someone that would serve some time maybe? And have people call and just be able to chat with someone who
That's
says,
like saying,
hey,
how many of you pilots have an opinion?
I think about that idea of having a personal mentor, someone that you can call and just bounce something off of. It just seems like it would be a great way to help. And I know I would take some calls. I would sign up for some time just to bounce off. And it doesn't mean you always say no to someone.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, it is good.
Yeah.
You guys heard it here.
Yeah. One day we'll have it. Your own personal dispatch.
I like that. I like that. Personal dispatch all the way. So, Jason, what's new at the Finer Points? Tell me what's going on there.
Well, we're just passionate about making our flight training app, and right now it's an instrument course. The thing that differentiates our product from others is the flying side. Really, we built it like you're coming to take flight lessons with me. So there's a pre-flight briefing, an actual flight with cameras at eye level, and then a post-flight debriefing for both the private and the instrument course. And our biggest goal this year is to make the product more relevant to people like you. You know, I tell, there's so much gold in there. You know, it's hard. I've been teaching for 20 years. And in our program, there's tons of gold, but like, how many of you guys are going to go out and buy a private pilot course? You know, you're probably not going to go buy that. So I want to make sure we extract some of that, the finer points, if you will, from deep within the app, and make sure that you all have access to it in the form of the standard operating procedures that I was talking about, or in any other way that makes sense to you. We're just working on making pilots safer and more confident.
Oh, you're going to hook me up because I definitely want it. I want to do that.
Yeah, I'll hook you up right away.
I need the standard operating procedures because I'm honest about everything. There's no perfect pilot here with me, and I definitely need to do a little bit better about having some of those things that help us.
I think we all do. You know, that's a funny thing that you just said too, because I was going to say that to folks here when we were talking about YouTube and all that. Like, don't feel bad if you find the wrong person, or you don't know if you found the best person on YouTube. Just remember that everything we're saying tonight, for me, for you, for Brian, for Jeff, it's all it's alive. It's not set in stone. My procedures might change tomorrow. I might decide that something I learned yesterday is not true, in fact, and that I have to readjust the way I think about it, right? So just keep your mind open, and we're all learning.
I've never had that happen.
Everyone except Brian.
And Brian, what's new with the Proficient Pilot?
Well, having been teaching for...
Don't say it.
Well, since I was 18, so 5 years now. The whole time I've been teaching, what I love is when I get more than one person ask the same question. Then I realize there's an interest in getting the answer to this question. I want to get it out there. And of course, I follow in some very big footsteps. I can't reinvent what my dad has already done, but what I can do is latch on to it. His books are called The Proficient Pilot. He has explained things in those books in a way that I think are fantastic still. It's not a biased opinion because he really was mean to me growing up. I have no love there. They're good books. But what I'd like to do, so I've kind of latched onto that name, and I'm going to take that content and basically try to teach it in a way that people can understand, taking complex ideas, making them really simple, because in the airplane, we don't want to know the crosswind component. We need to do the sine of 30 degrees. No, you don't want to do that. You need rules of thumb. You need something easy. We don't want to do public math while we're flying. So I'm just coming up with a realistic pilot's way to learn something, not how are we going to write the textbook on it. That's what I've been specializing in. Recently, obviously, I've been doing flight workshops. I've been having a lot of fun with that. I like doing a workshop, not a seminar, because I'm not preaching, I'm answering questions. And my good friend Mike Jesh here has been helping, and we've been doing those. We're going to transition into advancing, we'll keep doing flight, but we're going to talk about aviation stuff that people are asking a lot of questions about. Maybe we'll plan a cross country, how to plan a cross country, and say, ask these questions why. What kind of questions come up while we're doing it? I don't want to just tell you everything that I think you want to know. I want to hear what you want to know and then answer those questions. That's kind of the direction I'm working in.
I love that, absolutely. And we'll give you guys a little bit of a sneak preview also, because Brian and I are about to launch something you will see very soon. It's a podcast and video online called Cockpit to Cowl. And that's where we are going to take a mechanic perspective, the flight instructor and pilot perspective, and chat about subjects and topics.
Picture
where we
two
can-
Rams. Pilot and mechanic.
Exactly. Pilot and mechanic sitting here, beating heads together on subjects about how do we both view these types of things, which could be issues with your aircraft, or they could be flying, or it could be whatever. But there's these two perspectives that I don't think come together too often. And we already have recorded some of them, and I will say, without much scripting, if anything, really none. We just kind of scribble a couple of things before we start talking, and usually that.
Yeah, you have the advantage of flying an airplane you've worked on. If I worked on an airplane, I would never fly it. But thankfully, yeah, I wouldn't either. But I have a friend who can tell me, whether the maintenance was done right or wrong, and I've learned a lot from talking to you about that, and this has been fantastic as an aircraft owner. Like, I had no idea that I need to tell the shop to do that and make sure they don't do this.
That sounds fascinating. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, we'll have you on as well.
I'd love
I mean,
to.
it's just going to be a lot of fun. We haven't seen that. We realized how many conversations we have offline about both the mechanical and the what's happening in the head, what's happening in the engine, all the way around. And I think it'll be a heck of a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be great.
Excellent. So I just want to say thank you to all of you, of course. Thank you to Jason Miller, finer points.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much to Brian Schiff of The Proficient Pilot. And to all of you, of course, be sure to check out SocialFlight.com, the free SocialFlight
Stuff
mobile app.
jumps
We have
off
tens
these
of
tables.
thousands of aviation events and destinations. We have so much going on in there. We've got courses. You can get wings credit on demand on your time. If you're a mechanic or you just want to learn the things that your mechanic is learning, that's all there. Everything we do is free. And we're giving away an Aspen E5. That's coming up August 1st. We're always giving stuff away, and everything's free. And so we're just here to, do whatever we can.
And one real quick, can I do a shameless plug for you?
Oh.
So in the day of scenario-based training, you want any instructors looking for good scenarios, go to SocialFlight.com or go to his app, and you can find any kind of number of scenario. What's near me? Where can we go? It can be a hamburger. There's a museum at this other airport 20 miles away. Who knew? Well, I didn't know till I looked at his app. So that I come up with a lot of scenarios for training by looking at the app.
If you haven't looked recently, we had a team work for over a year putting thousands of destinations together that are curated, meaning photos, reviews, information. How do you fly in? Is there a courtesy car? Everything. We put this stuff together, and I just want to share it with all of you. Again, everything's free. Check it out. And of course, every Tuesday night, Social Flight Live is on, where we will not be in person, but we have it. And Ariel Tweedo is coming on Tuesday from Flying Wild Alaska. She'll be coming back on and talking about her family and that world. So thank you guys so much for doing this.
Yeah.
And thank all of you. And I wish you all blue skies. Thank you all for being here.
Watch your step.